but there are certainly some people who would have fun trying. Hey everyone, I'm Jack Fossett and welcome to Real Guitar Talk, this series where I'm tackling some subjects that I haven't seen openly talked about that I suspect many of us think a lot about and might even have questions about. Now, before we dive into the subject today, I can do these videos as long as I have things to talk about. So if there is any subject matter that you want me to tackle in this sort of series, please feel free to let us know in the comments. So, you can't play death metal on a jazz box. Believe it or not, I actually have a degree in journalism, and I fancied myself as a potential writer for guitar magazines when I was younger, and even wrote an article about this and submitted it to several guitar magazines, only to be viciously snubbed. That's neither here nor there. The idea of this is, what gear can you use for what genre? Now, the point of the flippant title is you really can use anything for anything. But people don't. And a lot of people have questions. Particularly, I found a lot of beginner to intermediate level guitar players have questions about what can you use. So one of the biggest questions that I get in doing review videos is this good for this genre? And the answer, for some people would be kind of a, yeah, do whatever you want. But even though that's true, it kind of glosses over some important facts about ourselves as guitar players that we might not want to acknowledge are there, some sort of hard truths that we need to reconcile with. Now, the first one, I think, is fairly obvious, which is we're very, very tied in with our influences. Now, we try and become our own musicians, but, right when you start playing guitar, there's obviously going to be some music you're into, some music you're not, and the tone of the guitar is something that draws us in. B.B. King wouldn't sound... I know tone is in your fingers, bear with me, but B.B. King didn't play a Dimebag Darrell guitar into a Frankenstein amp for a reason. Could that rig get the tone that he wanted? That's actually something we're going to tackle in a minute. But the point is that we kind of get in and we start going down a road and we fancy ourselves like our influences, and one of the first ways to do that is to start playing the gear that they played. So if you're into Stevie Ray Vaughan, you just love that tone. You're not going to get a Les Paul. Maybe you will, but for the most part, people who are really into Stevie Ray Vaughan or Hendrix or John Mayer or Eric Clapton, you're probably more likely to get a Stratocaster. If you get a Les Paul or something, you're already straying a little bit and taking it down a different road, which is good, which is all well and good, but again, the point is you're probably not going to be getting something with all kinds of crazy points and lightning bolts. Now, the reason I write you can't play death metal on a jazz box being my only rule, kind of, for what you can use for what you can't use this for that, is because if you tried to play death metal on a jazz box, it would pretty much just explode, I think. The feedback would actually be so crazy that I think either your guitar, your amplifier, or your head would explode. Now, it's death metal, so maybe that's the point. And I am going to stop any of you who are about to bring up Ted Nugent, because first of all, he did not play jazz boxes, he played hollow bodies, and that's a difference. And he did not play death metal, so spare me any of your Ted Nugent comments. Again, my point is that the only thing that would be holding you back is functionality, right? You could play in a metal band with a Rickenbacker guitar and a Vox amp, I always like to say that Crushing Gain is just a Boss Metal zone away. But why don't most metal players play a Rickenbacker guitar and a Vox amp if you can? It doesn't just have to do with influences, and it doesn't just have to do with tone. I think the hardest truth that a lot of guitar players don't want to admit is how visually directed we are when it comes to guitar. And I'm going to make the bold statement that the guitar, it's not as visually significant as it is auditory, but it's very significant visually. This goes back to the dawn of the guitar long before electric guitars were even born. The fact that the guitar is shaped kind of like a beautiful woman is something that always drew people in to playing it. Pete Townsend talked about the fact that it has kind of like almost like a gun-like thing to it, the way that you hold it. We call it an axe because it's kind of, the way that it is, it can kind of look like an axe. I actually never call it an axe. I hate that phrase, but it's a common thing to call it an axe. There is this combination of beauty and aggressiveness to the shape of the guitar. And we tend to take that a step further. We tend to take that further to really picturing ourselves using gear that we sort of draw up into this image of how we want to look. This really isn't that bad a thing. It's not a bad thing that the guitar is sort of a visually stimulating instrument. It's just something that I've seen a lot of people say that they, oh no, I don't care how it looks, I just care how it plays and sounds. It's like, really? Did you ever see when Gibson used to put out the Gecko Burst Les Paul? Because they didn't sell that many of those, and I think they even discounted them for a while. So by that rationale, shouldn't there be a ton of people out there playing Gecko Les Pauls that they got for cheaper because presumably they played exactly the same as every single other Les Paul that was out there? And Joe Bonamassa talked about this on a video. He was playing a Gretsch, I remember. If anyone can point out the video it was, because I've forgotten now. But he was in an interview and he was playing a Gretsch, and he was talking about using different guitars for blues. And he mentioned an old blues guy who went up on stage with something like a Dean guitar, like a Razorback or a Dimebag Darrell or something, and played old blues on it. And it was, this kind of like, oh wow, everybody can, you can still sound like him even playing this. And yeah, that's true. Like you could take, as long as you get a good clean tone, maybe a mild overdrive tone, and a guitar, does the shape matter? I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole right now, but yeah, you got a good guitar that has strings and good pickups in it, you can get a sound out of it. The thing is that it visually makes a statement that a lot of people don't want to make. If you go out and you perform in public, you are making a statement. And I want to pose a hypothetical in this situation. Let's say that for whatever genre of music you're playing, let's say that the best playing and the best sounding guitar that you've ever played or heard was a Daisy Rock sparkle heart-shaped guitar. Would you use it? Or would you go to the next best guitar that's something more like a Les Paul or a Stratocaster? Now, obviously that's not the reality, and that's kind of a ridiculous example, but my point is that at some point we favor something that is more visually pleasing. Because if you take that heart-shaped guitar out, maybe there's like a pop punk band where it's ironic or something and it works, but like, if you take that sparkle heart-shaped guitar out to your jazz gig or your blues gig or your blues rock gig, you're making a statement with it. You're communicating something to the audience with the visual. And this is why I actually struggle with it when people kind of callously brush aside what can you use for what genre. Obviously doing gear reviews, yeah, I'll talk a lot about like, hey, this gets a really good bluesy sound. Hey, this gets a really good classic rock sound, or, this and that and that and this. What does that really mean? I mean, you can go deep into philosophy for this, but basically what it means is it can get tones akin to the influences in that genre. It can sort of like walk the beaten path. You can do cool stuff if you don't walk the beaten path, if you make your own path. That's a little bolder for everybody, and particularly, again, for beginners or intermediate players. It's that might be something that's, it's like when I started playing, I was really into Les Pauls, but nobody was playing Les Pauls for blues back then. This was before Bonamassa was getting really successful and things, and everybody wanted to be like Stevie Ray. Everybody was playing Stratocasters if you were a blues player. So if you went to a blues gig, it was pretty much like all Strats all the time. And it was, for me, it was kind of like, I almost felt like I needed permission to play blues on a Les Paul. Obviously I didn't, but, when you're just sort of emerging into this world, you want to be accepted by it. Some people would be bolder than I am. Some people would be more tepid than I am. I still got the Les Paul, and I played some blues on it. I just felt kind of like, am I doing something wrong here? So even though, yeah, you can use anything for anything, it goes a little deeper than that. It goes to how we feel like we're connected to the genre that we're performing. It goes to the visual and what kind of statement we're making. Realistically, a Les Paul, an SG, a 335, an Explorer, they don't really make that much of a difference in tone. If we're really zeroing in on this, I talked about this a little bit in my Stop Saying Tone is in Your Fingers video. Please stop saying tone is in your fingers. It's another one, even though it's true, it's just such an obnoxious phrase. The more you zero in on tone, the more you see these little nuances, right? So if you play a 335 and a Les Paul back to back, yeah, you're really, really hyper focused on the differences and you'll notice it. But the more you kind of zoom out, now you talk about a Les Paul or 335 versus a Fender. Well, now the Gibsons start to sound a little bit more like each other because there's more contrast. Zoom out further, add in some other brands like Gretsch or Rickenbacker, and now, okay, the Gibsons sound even more like each other. And when the pedal hits the metal, so to speak, yes, I'm pretty sure, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Slash played the Knockin' on Heaven's Door solo on a Gibson Explorer. And, like, that could have very well been a Les Paul. It could have very well been an SG. It could have very well been a 335. Because the differences of those are so subtle that we just tend to, like, laser in on. But yeah, the differences are there, but we just get really, really attached to them. So then, why do you pick one or the other? There is a feel thing, certainly. Some people don't like the big 335. But I bet you a lot of people who play 335s over Les Pauls do it as much for the F-holes as they do for anything else. I know that's a bold statement, but that's something that I really think is true. I think people want to look like they have more of that Americana connection to roots instruments like the 335 has. It looks more like a traditional instrument with the F-holes in it. So, if you want to be bold, be bold. If you want to do something different, be different. One of the cool things about the era that we live in is there's so much accessible gear, and so many of the rules have been broken that you can kind of just do what you want. You really don't need permission from anyone to do anything, but what I would actually caution against is sort of feeling like you're doing anyone a favor by just brushing off a question like that and saying, like, you can use whatever you want for whatever you want. Because chances are you might be making a beginner or an intermediate just feel more lost. The fact of the matter is that sometimes when they're asking that question, they're asking this question of sort of like, does this tie me in with the music that inspires me? Does this show that I have this sort of deep love for this music? Does it sound like that? Give them a little bit more of a thoughtful answer. But get a great guitar, get a great amplifier, go rule the world. I'm Jack Fossett. Thank you for tuning in. If you want to support the channel, you are going to find a link below to a Gear Recommendations webpage. There's affiliate links on that webpage. If you shop through those, I get a consideration at no additional cost to you. You'll also find my PayPal and Venmo down there. If you send me a tip of $7 or more, I'm going to give you access to a webpage where you can get all my music downloads, including jam tracks. Please also let me know in the comments what other subjects do you want me to tackle in Real Guitar Talk. Again, I'm Jack Fossett. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. We'll see you next time.